If we do real harm on the Iranians, then they get involved. And now we're talking about an expansive conflict, and we only got 2,000 guys in that region. That ain't a lot of guys. And if the whole region blows up, those 2,000 guys can be swamped. They can be overrun. And now we have to divert all our air power into that area. Again, who's going to pay for it? We don't have a budget for this. And now we're doing that. And this war gets out of control, spins out of control. This is a nightmare scenario for the Biden administration. And if it blows up enough, because another area that everybody's worried about is what's going to happen with Hezbollah. Hezbollah has done a masterful job of escalation management. They have been, I mean, it's like the Israelis, are sitting there in this boxing match with Hamas, and Hamas split the eye, and Israel's bleeding here, and Hezbollah is just sitting there once in a while going, "Let me rub some salt in that wound for you. And come on, get out of here." Boom, boom, pow, and they get salt in that wound. Stop it. Hezbollah is just sitting there pissing them off because they're really, really putting, and it's hurting them. Remember how sophisticated I said the Houthi were? Understand that most of what Hezbollah is doing against Israel is economic in nature. Yes, they're taking down Israeli troops. They're destroying a lot of Israeli tanks, a lot of Israeli infrastructure. But what they're really doing is terrorizing the north so much that 70,000 Israelis had to be withdrawn from the northern settlements and resettled in temporary accommodations. That ain't free. That ain't free. It's costing Israel billions of dollars. And that 70,000 who, they had jobs up there, which means they're working, they're producing, there's taxes, the economy kind of stuff. They're here now. They ain't working. They ain't producing. They're just sucking up resources. It's a huge, huge, giant, gutting of the Israeli economy. The same thing out of what Hamas is doing in the settlements in Negev. People tens of thousands had to be relocated. Man, this is a giant hole in the Israeli economy, and it's unsustainable. On top of that, 300,000 reservists. You know what a reservist is? It's a working man. It's a guy who has a job. He has a family. He is participating in the Israeli economic experience. And now he's not. Now he's in the reserves where he's getting a paycheck because they have to pay him, but he's not producing anything. That job is gapped. Whatever he was doing in the Israeli economy ain't happening right now. And billions of dollars. So what Hezbollah is doing, what the Houthi are doing, the economic impact on this is destroying the Israeli economy, destroying it. And this is unsustainable for Israel. So this alone is prompting the Israelis to say, we have to resolve this fight. You got people like Gallant. I think he's the Minister of Defense right now. What a character, with his genocidal talk. But he's talking about we're going to take it to them. Gallant knows, though, and so does the Israeli Defense Force, that if Israel were to open up a second front against Hezbollah, that Hezbollah will take Galilee, that northern Israel will fall. Because Hezbollah's got 80,000 guys. Many of them, most of them perhaps, are combat hardened. That means they've been fighting in that, the Syrian conflict. These guys know war. They're very well trained, very well equipped, very well motivated, and they have a plan. If you think the Hamas plan that was executed on October 7th was innovative, you haven't seen anything yet. Hezbollah has a plan to take northern Israel, and they will take northern Israel, and there's nothing Israel can do to stop it, which is a nightmare. So nobody wants escalation. So in a way, because we can't afford to escalate, the United States can't afford to escalate, Israel can't afford to escalate, you make it even, you give the people who are putting the pressure on you even more latitude because they know you don't want to escalate. So they're going to push the envelope even more and create more and more pressure. And that's what's happening right now. This is the untold aspect of this war, but it's this aspect that's probably going to promote, the collapse of Israel more so than just Hamas defeating Israel in Gaza.
Yeah, and maybe lastly on this, do you feel like the confluence of these various aspects of Israel's brutal onslaught and what it's produced, both in its troubles with fighting Hamas on its own terrain and the fact that that there is an axis of resistance that has been managing a conflict escalator that is prepared to move up, Do you feel like, given that Biden has given this deadline, that Israel will actually follow it? Because Israel's capacity for rational military and political behavior, especially since the aftermath of October 7th, appears to have diminished nearly to non-existence. I'm curious on your thoughts about that.
I mean, it's a tough political question here in America because of the control that the Israeli lobby has over everything. Congress, the presidency, the media, the spin. So it's an uphill struggle to get America to, change its policy regarding Israel. In the past, it was Israel can do no wrong. We support Israel no matter what. But we're now paying a price for that. And so I do believe you're going to see pressure being put on Israel. I think Netanyahu is finished. I think he's going to go. I think Biden is going to make it clear that continued American support of Israel is contingent upon a change in the Netanyahu government. We pretend that it doesn't mean Netanyahu is going to go, but if you dissolve this right-wing coalition, then Netanyahu can't continue as prime minister because it's consensus-driven. He has to get a ruling coalition. He won't be able to. Somebody else will step in and take over, and that's what we want. But here's the danger of all this, Danny. Here's the problem. And we got to be honest about this, because right now we're being lulled into a false sense of complacency. Hamas is kicking ass. There's no doubt about it. Hamas will not be defeated. But who likes Hamas? Does Egypt like Hamas? Nope. Does Jordan like Hamas? No. Does Syria like Hamas? Not really. They were just at war with them a couple of years ago. They tolerate Hamas. Turkey? Yeah, Turkey likes Hamas, but not that much. Not enough to go to war for them. And the further we get away, you realize that Hamas is very unpopular. And if we just erase the term Hamas and insert the term Palestinian, let's be honest, nobody cares about the Palestinians. There's a whole bunch of demonstrations taking place right now, but these are cause-effect demonstrations, meaning that if it weren't for the slaughter of the Gazans, these demonstrations wouldn't be happening. These people aren't going to go into the streets and demonstrate on behalf of a two-state solution or a one-state solution or a free Palestine. They're demonstrating because the bombing's happening. So what happens when the bombs stop falling, when the genocide stops? Are these people going to continue to be out there putting the pressure on the United States? Is the United States going to continue to feel isolated, or is it going to go back to what it was, where people say, wait a minute, so they've stopped, we don't have to turn on TV and look at dead Palestinian babies anymore? Oh, thank God. So let's get back to what we were doing, which is chugging along with normal economic activity where the Palestinians are problematic. We don't want to do it. And so the danger here is that all the sacrifice that the Palestinians have made, and believe me, they are making the suffering they're doing through, and you see there's a growing recognition amongst them that they have to do this. This is their burden to pay to get statehood, that all of that will be for naught, because there will be a desire to, we don't want to embarrass Israel. We don't want to humiliate Israel. We're going to look for a compromise solution where we have a moderate Israeli government who will return to giving lip service to, reviving Oslo, but never really being serious about reviving Oslo. And gradually, the Palestinians will be forgot again. I'm afraid that's the direction that we're heading. And so, it's imperative that the international community find a way to sustain this pressure, because change will happen, because the United States feels the pressure. I mean, when we start turning on Israel, the pressure is working. All right. But the problem is, let's say we get Israel to change, the fighting stops in Gaza. Now the United Nations comes in with their, because the UN doesn't like the Palestinians either. I mean, nobody likes the Palestinians. They've been getting screwed by everybody forever. And so you start turning it over to these old institutions, and it's forgotten. The only one out there articulating right now for the Palestinians seriously is Iran. And here's where the hope is, because Iran has good relations with two nations who are the nemesis of the United States in the geopolitical arena, Russia and China. And Russia and China have historically kept sort of a hands-off approach to the Palestinian issue. But I think Russia and China, I think they do care about the Palestinians. There's a genuine concern. You see, Putin articulating things that no Western leader has ever articulated about what Israel is doing, criticizing Israel. And China's talking about getting engaged. And it's in China's interest to take advantage of what's going on to expand. Because what is Gaza going to need? Infrastructure development. Who's pretty good at that? China. So it's an opportunity for China. It also, if you keep pushing the necessity of a Palestinian state to resolve this Arab-Israeli conflict, you keep putting pressure on the United States too. What the United States wants to do is quickly get back to, even though Biden says that we won't be returning to October 6th, I guarantee you all the U.S. wants to do is get back to October 6th. That's all we want to do. We're not looking forward to any of this innovative political stuff in the Middle East. It scares us. Russia and China, on the other hand, are looking forward to something like that. So I'm not giving up hope for the Palestinians, but I am saying that all this stuff that we're seeing, all this pressure, these votes at the UN, that can disappear that quick. And you know it. You know it can, because we're not talking about, a deep foundation of love for the Palestinians out there in the world. We don't like seeing dead Palestinian kids. So people are rallying to the cause of Palestine. But when the kids stop dying, will that support for Palestine still be there? And that's the big question.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a big question, and I share your sentiment about where the hope is, because yes, Iran is indeed a very serious actor when it comes to supporting Palestine. And I think you're exactly right. Both Russia and China, when it comes to this region, see the Palestine question as both one of course, standing for international law. That's what Russia and China like to do. They like to promote it because it's within their interests. Most stable, rational countries who are thinking about both their own development and what's good for the world in terms of their own development. It's stability. It's peace. It's not having this massive conflict, which could lead, that's genocidal in nature, that could lead to a very hot war between most countries in the region. That is an ultimate disaster for Russia and China. So, of course, this Palestine question is so important to not just stabilize, but also, Russia and China are the only countries outside of the region, for the most part, outside of some outliers that don't have the same kind of influence. But the biggest countries that do support a Palestinian state and legitimately do, not giving lip service like Blinken does when he says we're for this two-state solution, and then green lights the absolute eradication of it that Israel is pursuing. Both Russia and China actually do support this.
Yeah, and we are living in an age of geopolitical transformation. I mean, it sounds very academic. It sounds like geopolitics 201. Your junior level course in college for that international relations degree. But it's real and it's happening, and it's in many ways it's exciting, but in many ways it's scary. Because we collectively, the world, have for so long grown accustomed to American hegemony. We can talk about how we're opposed to it, and everybody's like, we're against American imperialism. We're against hegemony. We're against the rules-based international order. Of course you are, except you're not, because you are for stability. And while there is a whole bunch of instability in the world out there, there's a whole bunch of stability that's brought about by this. And people are lulled into a false sense of complacency by the perception of stability. And right now, where this transformation that's taking place from the American singularity to this global multipolarity, BRICS and all that stuff, it scares people, because it means you have to put your faith and your trust in something else. Now, if you're somebody who has been disrupted by the American singularity, yeah, you're ready to jump ship. But if you're somebody whose life has been chugging along in relative comfort, it's a scary proposition, a frightening proposition. So it's not, automatic logic where people say, well, America's failed, so we're going to jump on the Chinese and the Russian ship. Well, for many places in the world, America hasn't failed. We didn't get to be number one because we're a bunch of losers. Okay, we did some things right, and we bullied our way to the top, whatever you want to say. But America is a very powerful nation that has a lot of successes attached to it. And a lot of people around the world found those successes attractive. Especially the political and economic elites who make money off the American singularity. And so this idea that we're just going to seamlessly transfer power over to the Russians and the Chinese, that ain't going to happen. This is a very scary time. And it would be scary if this transformation was taking place in a conflict-free environment. But now we start throwing in the not only the reality of war, but, what's that?
Backed by Syria, and Syria is backed by Iran. And then we will see the strategic defeat of Israel. We may see the end of Benjamin Netanyahu physically or politically. And whatever replaces him in Israel will be somebody who is compelled by this defeat to seek peace in a way that's equitable for the Palestinian people. But until which time Israel is strategically defeated, there's no hope for peace. None whatsoever, because Israel, as it currently exists, can't have peace, because peace requires them to treat the Palestinian people with respect, with dignity. And Israel today is incapable of treating the Palestinian people with the respect and dignity, not only that they deserve, but that they demand. What happened yesterday, as violent and ugly as it was a manifestation of the demand that the Palestinians be treated seriously, with respect. I, like everybody else, I think shudders at the death and destruction that took place. I wish it had never happened. But you sow the wind, you reap the whirlwind, and Israel is reaping the whirlwind right now as we speak. It's tragic, but tragically it's necessary.
What do you say, Scott, to those who doubt the scale of the negligence that appears to have been involved in all of this being planned? It clearly was planned. The build-up to it must have been long in the making. And yet this most heavily surveyed patch of earth in the world, all this was taking shape and then executed with quite spectacular levels of military success, however ghastly.
Look, there's no doubt that Hamas has pulled off, and this will be studied for years. Again, military professionals have to put aside politics and study military events with a professional eye. And what Hamas did yesterday is one of the most remarkable military feats in modern history. First of all, to be able to plan this without being detected by the Israelis is, as you indicate, almost miraculous. Now, I have an answer as to how this came about. I actually have just written an article. It'll come out in Consortium News later this afternoon that addresses this issue. But I think this, Winston Churchill once famously said that he quipped about the War Office that they are always fighting the last war, never the next war. Israel is guilty of that in my mind. They are fighting 2021, Operation, I forget whatever, they named so many things, Wall Guardian or Guardian on Walls or something like that.
Been so many of them, yeah.
But Israel openly bragged at the end of this conflict, which they claim to have won, and yet Hamas still exists. They said this was the first artificial intelligence war. That you mentioned it. It's the most heavily surveilled piece of terrain in the world. Every 10 minutes, every meter of Gaza is photographed by Israel. And that data, those images go into a giant computer database. They collect every cell phone conversation, every text message, any email messaging. They have total control. They have human spies on the ground. And Israel bragged about this right afterwards in 2022. The first artificial intelligence battle, we had total domination of the information spectrum, and we were able to use artificial intelligence to predict outcomes, meaning that it wasn't a human being now that is telling Israel what to do. It is a computer algorithm put together by Israeli intelligence, and the Israelis bragged about this. And I will say this about Hamas and about the Palestinians and about Hezbollah. They aren't stupid. These are some of the smartest people on the planet, and they are survivors. And as soon as they heard that Israel had turned over the thinking process to a computer, I believe they sat there and they gamed the system. And they sat there and they created a whole bunch of artificial information that lulled the computer into a false sense of complacency. And because the Israelis had yielded their thinking ability to a computer, they went into Yom Kippur mode. And I don't mean this year, I mean 1973, where once again, all the information was there that an attack was going to take place. Hamas said an attack was going to take place. This is not a secret. Hamas has been saying over and over and over again, this is coming. We are going to do this. We will avenge the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So any thinking person, any rational person would have said, we need to prepare for this. But because Israel yielded its thought process to a computer programmed by people who did not respect Hamas, this intelligence failure took place. That's what I firmly believe.
Now, the whole of the south of Israel was, for a time, out with the control of the government in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem. The Palestinian militants, the factions, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, many, many groups, some of which I actually hadn't heard of before. They were all running amok. They were attacking settlements and settlers. They were defeating Israeli forces that they found. They were capturing Israeli police stations, military bases, prisons even. Why did it take Israel so long to get on top of the situation, even given the caveats that you've just made about how they missed it coming in the first place?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. I mean, first of all, we'll never know until the Israelis do an honest to goodness, form a commission to do a politically neutral autopsy on what happened here. But I can speculate, and I just want everybody to understand that that's exactly what's happening right now is speculation. Israel has been a fundamentally broken state in terms of domestic politics for some time now, ever since Bibi Netanyahu returned as prime minister. His corruption followed him, his attempt to shield himself from prosecution by taking over the court system so that he and he alone can appoint judges that are favorable to his position has divided this nation, the nation of Israel, like never before. Prior to the Hamas attack, there were hundreds of thousands of Israelis taking to the streets on a regular basis to protest Benjamin Netanyahu. Thousands of Israeli reservists, the very reservists who are being called up now, said they will not serve an Israel that has a Bibi Netanyahu who violates the basic fundamentals of law there. So Israel was a divided nation. The military also, I believe, has just taken a unique stance regarding modern warfare. Look, there are many Russians right now who have learned the hard lessons of war over the course of the past 600 plus days in Ukraine, who are looking at the imagery of the Israeli military response saying these are the most amateurish people we have ever seen in our lives. Their tactics, their approach, the timid nature of these soldiers is shocking. I think the Israeli army has lost the ability to close with and destroy the enemy through firepower and maneuver. They are so casualty averse that they've created a whole unit based upon unique technologies to let robots do the fighting for them. They let computers do the thinking for them. The last thing they want to do is put one of their soldiers on the ground against somebody who is trained and capable of killing them. They're very good at beating up women, beating up children, beating up villagers, beating up old men, old women, but they're not very good at fighting people who stand up and fight back. And let's be clear here, the Hamas people who are fighting right now, these are lightly armed people with what their courage is cannot be doubted. but their skill set is limited. These are people who have not had the advantages of the military training and technology that the Israelis had, and yet they're fighting them still today, as we speak, outside of the Gaza Strip, in Israeli territory. They hold 30% of the territory that they captured on day one, and they are fighting. The Israelis can't beat them yet. They will beat them. There's no doubt about that. But Israel has forgot how to fight. They have forgot, because Yom Kippur 1973 was so bloody for them. Their experience in Lebanon was so bloody for them that they said, never again, we won't do that kind of fighting. Unfortunately, when you raise the level of hatred in a captive population, such as the Palestinians in Gaza, and those people decide to rise up, you are going to have to fight. There's a lot of incompetence going on in Israel right now. There's tremendous amount of military incompetence. The people I feel sorry for, to be honest, I mean, I'm just being frank here, are the Israelis who lived in the South. Not because of, there's a political question of should they be there, et cetera, et cetera. But these are people who believe the Israeli government when the Israeli government said, we will keep you safe. You can go to sleep at night. You will be safe. We will be there for you. If anything happens to you, we will come for you. And they were abandoned by their government, abandoned by their military. They're still abandoned to this day. Shame on the Israeli government. Shame on the Israeli military. There should be mass resignations, but this is all done because the men and women who wear the uniform today, who didn't come to the rescue of these Israelis in their time of need, should be evicted from their positions.
If Israel does invade on the ground, and given that there are now a very substantial number, more than there have ever been before, of Israeli prisoners taken in this Al-Aqsa operation, Al-Aqsa flood, there are real problems about a ground invasion that imperils we now know many Americans are amongst those who have been taken prisoner. These prisoners, hostages, will be held in exchange, hoping to exchange them for the 5,000 plus political prisoners in Israeli jails. So a ground invasion is fraught with that difficulty of harming their own people, but also the risk of bringing Hezbollah into the conflict, and thus the possibility of a very big war, two-sided war, indeed. So do you think they are going to go in? And if so, how will that work out?
Israel conducted a major military exercise earlier this year that tested this very scenario. What would happen if an uprising in the West Bank, uprising in Gaza, Hezbollah intervenes in the north, Iran intervenes? What would Israel do? And they did this major exercise, and it turned out that Israel lost. Israel can't win that war. So Bibi Netanyahu knows this. He was the prime minister when this exercise was held. His senior military officers know this. And so I have to believe that they're not suicidal. And now the question they are probably asking themselves is Hezbollah bluffing? Will Hezbollah really commit to this fight? Or is this just a bluff, and should we call Hezbollah's bluff? Because there's a tremendous amount of political pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu now to be seen as doing something decisive to bring this Hamas issue to an end. And that requires a major military move into Gaza, which I will tell you right now, Israel will lose. Will lose. Because the Israeli army can't suffer casualties. Going into urban warfare, if you've learned anything from Mariupol, if you've learned anything from Bakhmut, these horrible names that have come out, and I say horrible because of the death and destruction that took place in the fighting for these places, Gaza will become like that and worse. The Israelis will suffer losses like they can't even imagine, greater than the Yom Kippur War in its totality. And this is politically unacceptable for Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli people. So I can't tell you what they're going to do. What I can say is that if they go into Gaza, They will have to stop their operation almost immediately because every force there in Gaza will be needed in northern Israel. Because when Hezbollah comes in, they will make what Hamas did the other day look like child's play. The entire north
intercepting communications. So what Israel thought they knew about Gaza changed overnight. When they went in on October 7th, 8th, 9th, and thereafter, they're going in blind. They have to start all over. And how does Israel do this? Through an over-reliance of artificial intelligence. They have a targeting algorithm that they've developed where they've linked each house in Gaza to a specific outcome for Hamas. It doesn't mean that they're going to achieve it, but if you hit this house, this is what it does to Hamas. And they also know that this is how many civilian casualties will be accrued. So there is no, oh, this is collateral damage. We had no idea so many people would die. This is deliberate murder based on target. It's called the gospel. I think the Jewish term is hasbara or something of that nature. That's in play today. This is mass murder, genocide by the Israeli government against the Palestinian people. And it failed. And so it failed on a number of fronts. It failed in regards to Hamas, but because it failed so egregiously, the Netanyahu government was under pressure from a domestic audience saying, hey, you're not succeeding. We need our relatives freed. We need the hostages released. The entire world reacted to this collective punishment, this indiscriminate bombing with horror, millions of people in the streets. The United States State Department filed a memorandum, internal memorandum, a dissent memorandum saying the policies of the Biden administration are destroying the credibility and viability of America abroad. And so we started putting pressure. So Netanyahu had to agree to a ceasefire. He didn't want to. This was a political disaster for him. And so he was looking for any excuse to get out of the ceasefire. He found it. They're now back at war. He can't afford to have a second ceasefire. That would be the end of him politically. But he's failing militarily. As we speak, the Netanyahu government is being, the IDF, is being defeated in certain areas of Gaza. They've had to retreat from certain areas in Gaza because of the casualties they've taken. This is hugely demoralizing for their military. So Netanyahu is in his government are in a very dire straits in terms of their domestic political reality. There's nothing they can do to change the fact that Netanyahu's political days are over. He is the problem, not the solution. He will be removed from power, either from pressure from the United States or pressure from domestic or both. But we need to stop talking about what Israel wants right now. Israel doesn't want anything. Netanyahu wants everything. He needs to be removed and a new, more legitimate Israeli government in place that speaks on behalf of the majority of the Israeli population, then can speak about what they want. They may not change their policies. Who knows? But I think, realpolitik will set in, and the Israelis are going to have to make adjustments. Economically, they cannot sustain this fight indefinitely. With hundreds of thousands of reservists mobilized who are no longer participating in the economy, with tens of thousands of Israeli citizens displaced from not only around Gaza, but in the north, forced to be resettled, no jobs. They're living off of the support provided by the Israeli government. The economy is faltering. Hundreds of thousands of Israeli Jews are fleeing Israel for more stable locations. This is a strategic defeat, a disaster for Israel, that if they can't find the way to defeat Hamas, and I don't believe they can, you can't defeat an ideal, especially one that resonates so strongly amongst not only the Palestinian people, but the entire world. It can't be defeated by Israel. So I think Israel won't get what it wants out of this war. We have to understand that they did not initiate this conflict. They didn't want this conflict. They weren't expecting this conflict. the Netanyahu government on October 6th had a policy that was predicated on the normalization of relations with Saudi Arabia, the initiation of this new economic-based conception that was described by Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu. Biden announced it during the G20 meeting in India, talked about the India-Middle East Economic Corridor. Benjamin Netanyahu bragged about it during his presentation to the General Assembly in the United Nations. This was the direction that Israel was going. Israel was also, under the Netanyahu government, making sure that there would never be a two-state solution, never be a Palestinian state. They were in the process of expanding operations to create new settlements in the West. And they thought that they had bought off Hamas and the Palestinians in the Gaza by increasing the number of work permits, that this perception of new economic viability on the part of the Gazan Palestinians linked to a relationship with Israel, an ongoing economic relationship, would preclude any precipitous actions by Hamas. So when October 7th came around, the Netanyahu government is faced with a whole new reality. And now they're adjusting to it. And this reality is 100% security, politically motivated. It's couched as a security reaction, but it's political. Benjamin Netanyahu was a politician already fighting for his political life prior to October 7th because of what he had done in terms of rewriting Israeli basic law regarding control of the judiciary. It was supposed to be an independent branch of government, and instead, under the new law, it would be subordinated to a politicized Israeli parliament, the Knesset. And the purpose of this wasn't to improve Israeli jurisprudence, but rather to prevent the prosecution of Benjamin Netanyahu on corruption charges. So, hundreds of thousands of Israelis were already in the streets protesting against this man. The Israeli president had said that the situation was so dire that Israel could be looking at an actual civil war. And then comes October 7th. And so you have this already unpopular prime minister now presiding over the greatest security failure in the history of Israel. This is bigger than 1973 Yom Kippur War. This is a absolute failure on the part of the Netanyahu government, but also Israeli intelligence and the Israeli Defense Force themselves. And so the entire leadership of Israel is at risk of losing political viability, meaning that they should and could possibly be removed from power at any moment. The only reason why they're staying in power is because the Netanyahu government now has declared war, or as they have said, war was declared on Israel by Hamas. And if you're in for a dime, you might as well be in for a dollar. So if you're going to go to war with Hamas, now you articulate goals and objectives that reflect this war status. And you say that Israel is going to destroy not only the military aspects of Hamas, the organizational structures of Hamas, but politically, Hamas will be eliminated. Hamas will never again rule Gaza. And if you look at it from that standpoint, Israel has failed across the board. When we take a look at the millions of people who are in the streets in cities around the world protesting in support of Palestine, they're protesting in support of Hamas. They may not admit they are, but the reality is they wouldn't be there if it weren't for Hamas. They wouldn't be there if Hamas hadn't attacked Israel and created this overreaction, or the opportunity for this overreaction. It's Israel that has done it to itself. Israel didn't need to invoke the Dahiya doctrine, named after the West Beirut suburb, which in 2006 Israel flattened as part of a new principle of collective punishment, that makes sure that any civilian population linked to a political entity that is poses a security threat to Israel, that they will be punished collectively to put pressure on them, to pressure their own political entity to stop doing what Israel objects to. It was done against the Lebanese to put pressure on Hezbollah. It failed miserably. And it's been done repeatedly against the Palestinians in Gaza to put pressure on Hamas. This is even prior to October 7th, and it's failed miserably. And it's failing now. This collective punishment that Israel has undertaken has turned the world against Israel. This is a victory for Hamas. We need to also point out that the Netanyahu government was vociferously against a two-state solution, a Palestinian state, said there will not be one. They believe in Eretz Israel, greater Israel, or biblical Israel. That doesn't include any notion of Palestinian statehood. And so right now, the entire world is talking about the absolute necessity of a two-state solution. Again, this wouldn't have happened without Hamas. Israel had taken thousands of Palestinians prisoner. They'd taken thousands more prisoner, treated them brutally, subjected them to torture, rape, murder. Nobody was talking about putting pressure on Israel to release these prisoners, these hostages held by Israel, until Hamas attacked on October 7th and took hostages of their own, which they use as a bargaining chip. This is a Hamas victory, not an Israeli victory. Israel is suffering huge political consequences. More pressure is put on Netanyahu daily by the families of the remaining hostages to get their release. And Israel is not destroying Hamas. Hamas military is fighting the Israeli Defense Force to a standstill in many parts of Gaza. They're inflicting very significant casualties on Israel. And remember, Israel says that their victory is defined by the total destruction of Hamas. And if Israel doesn't achieve that, then Israel is by definition lost. And Israel right now is not achieving this. So the Netanyahu government has achieved nothing. They've made the situation even worse for Israel, and they've made it worse for them politically. Netanyahu has a 4% approval rating. He had an emergency meeting of his war council the other night, and he concluded the business without holding the things he was putting forward up to vote. The point is, Israel's achieved none of its objectives, and it's not going to achieve these objectives. These objectives unrealistic, and the Netanyahu government isn't doing anything for the legitimate security of Israel. They're doing everything for their own political survival, and I think their days are numbered. I think pressure is being put on them internally from domestic political opposition and externally from friends and allies, including the United States, who are saying that it's increasingly clear that the problem here is Benjamin Netanyahu, and that Benjamin Netanyahu and his right-wing coalition government have to step aside, have to get out of the way.
When it comes to the situation that Israel was in before October 7, in terms of the relations with Arab states, with other countries surrounding Israel, how do you see it right now?
The fact is, Israel is in very many ways, because of its overwhelming support by the United States, the support that it gets from the United States, has become a de facto indispensable nation of the Middle East. And you combine that with the reality that, with very few exceptions, most nations in the Middle East are not pro-Palestinian. They're not supportive of the Palestinian Authority or a Palestinian state. And that Israel had exploited this antipathy amongst the Gulf Arab nations, for instance, amongst Israel's immediate neighbors, toward the Palestinians for their own good, leveraging the concept of the possibility of a Palestinian state that could never be reach manifestation because of the definition. This is the Abraham Accord. What Israel has said about a two-state solution, it's unattainable, unachievable, unrealistic, but it's there on the table. And the Arab nations who claim to be supporting Palestine, but who secretly don't, say, well, Israel's made a good faith effort here. Now we'll normalize relations with Israel so we can get on with reaping the economic and geopolitical benefits of normalization. That all appears to be on hold, but nothing's fundamentally changed. The political reality of the situation is such that these nations have to take a stance that appears to be supportive of the Palestinian people, of a Palestinian state. but they are distancing themselves from Hamas, and they aren't cutting off relations with Israel, which tells me that if and when this conflict ends, and it will end, that there's a real risk that the nations that are lining up to support a Palestinian state today will slide back to their previous posture of either indifference or hostility towards Palestine. And this will be to the benefit of Israel. Now, the longer this conflict goes on and the deeper the damage that Israel is doing to itself in terms of its how the world perceives it, could create a new political dynamic, a new political reality amongst these Arab states. And if that happens, then there will be a Palestinian state. There's no doubt in my mind. But if this conflict is brought to an end and then the cause of a Palestinian state goes into endless negotiations by people who really don't have the best interests of Palestine in mind, we could find ourselves returning to square one, which then brings up Hamas, which is not going to quit until there is a Palestinian state. And I think that the failure of Israel to defeat Hamas empowers Hamas politically and gives them increased leverage to tell the Arab world, the Islamic world, that we will not go away. We will not quit. We will continue to resist. And that the best way to bring peace and stability to the region is to create a true Palestinian, independent Palestinian state, which includes Hamas as a political entity. You can't make Hamas disappear. If there were elections in the Palestinian, in the Gaza and West Bank today, I think Hamas would win overwhelmingly. The Palestinian Authority has no credibility, none, zero credibility. Hamas has all the credibility in the world because it's the only Arab organization that's fighting for the Palestinian people.
How do you see the possibility of Hezbollah getting more seriously involved in this battle? Is that possible, in your opinion?
Oh, of course it's possible. It's even likely, given what Hezbollah has done is it has maintained a extraordinarily high levels of pressure on Israel along the border between Israel and Lebanon. The purpose of this was to force Israel to divert resources from Gaza to Lebanon and to put strain, economic and political strain on Israel at a time when it was supposed to be singularly focused on resolving the Gaza crisis. Up to 70,000 Israelis have been evacuated from northern Israel. They have to be housed, cared for at enormous economic cost to Israel. Whatever economic activity took place in the north has come to a halt. So that's an unsustainable reality that Israel can't just allow to occur. And Hezbollah keeps ratcheting up the pressure. Israel right now has confronted Benny Gantz, the Minister of War, has come out and said that Israel has no choice but to turn its attention to Lebanon to compel Hezbollah to withdraw from the border. This is suicidal. Lebanon is as prepared for whatever Israel is going to do as Hamas was prepared for Israel. And Hezbollah is an organization that has far more military capacity than Hamas. It will be fatal for Israel to expand this conflict. And I think that's why it might not happen, is that the Israelis know that if they engage decisively with Hezbollah, they will suffer a decisive defeat. And that could be very problematic, not only for the Netanyahu government, but for anybody who's joined his coalition, his wartime coalition, like Benny Gantz and others. So it's a very dangerous situation, one where there is an absolute threat of an expansion of this conflict to draw in Hezbollah, but also one that the consequences of such expansion are so dire that it might be difficult for Israel to act on it, which is what Hezbollah is betting on, that Israel will make a decision to seek a ceasefire before they make a decision to escalate. Time will tell.
One of the countries that is so important is Saudi Arabia. How do you see their policy in Gaza? Are they looking for some sort of sanity, some sort of solution for Gaza?
Well, their official position and what their real position is might be two different things. Their official position is that they support Palestine, they support the Palestinian people, they support a two-state solution, and therefore they are opposed to the ongoing Israeli actions. Their unofficial position is they were ready to normalize relations with Israel to, offset the axis of resistance, Hamas, Hezbollah, Syria, Iran, the Houthi, pro-Shia